Zanim zaczniemy, chciałbym Was prosić o małą przysługę. Bardzo staram się osiągnąć kamień milowy 1000 subskrybentów, co jest dla mnie naprawdę znaczącą liczbą. Proszę, kliknijcie przycisk subskrybuj kanał. To tylko jedno kliknięcie, ale stanowi to dla mnie ogromną motywację do tworzenia kolejnych filmów. Dziękuję Wam.
The Cabernet splashed across his bespoke tuxedo, dark like fresh blood against the crisp white shirt. The entire ballroom went dead silent. Harper froze, the empty tray rattling in her shaking hands. She waited for the gunshot. She waited for the men in the shadows to drag her out back. Instead, the most feared man in the city leaned in close. Ha's breath ghosted over her ear. "Smile," he whispered, "and pretend you're my wife tonight." The service corridor smelled of industrial bleach and burnt sugar. Harper shifted her weight from her left foot to her right, trying to ignore the blistering pinch of her cheap orthopedic shoes. She had been on her feet for 9 hours. Her lower back throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that kept time with the muffled bass echoing from the main ballroom. "Trays up, girls. Let's move." The floor manager, a sweaty man named Gary, who smelled entirely too much of peppermint schnapps, clapped his hands. Harper grabbed the nearest silver platter. It was heavy, loaded with crystal flutes of champagne and delicate, overpriced tartlets that tasted like nothing. She plastered on the required, vacant, polite smile and pushed through the swinging double doors. The grand ballroom of the Beaumont Hotel was a different world. The air in here was aggressively climate-controlled, chilled to preserve the thousands of white orchids cascading from the ceiling. It smelled of expensive perfume, ozone, and old money. Hundreds of people moved in slow, deliberate clusters. They wore silk and diamonds. They laughed without opening their mouths too wide. Harper navigated through them like a ghost. That was the rule of high-end catering. You were furniture that occasionally dispensed alcohol. She kept her eyes down, scanning the floor for trailing hemlines and discarded napkins. "Table 4. A voice hissed in her earpiece. "They're dry. Get over there." Harper altered her route. Table 4 was positioned near the center of the room, cordoned off by an invisible perimeter of tension. People gave it a wide berth. Even the other waitstaff seemed to take longer routes, just to avoid passing behind the chairs. She approached from the side. There were 6 men at the table. 5 of them were built like brick walls, poured into suits that couldn't hide the bulk of their shoulders. They sat rigidly, eyes constantly scanning the exits. And then there was the man in the center, Leon Cavallo. Harper didn't follow the news closely, but she lived in this city. You didn't survive in the lower-income districts without knowing whose name was stamped on the invisible deeds to the streets. Leon wasn't a loud man. He didn't boast. He just sat there, nursing a tumbler of amber liquid, his posture relaxed but entirely coiled. He had dark, neatly trimmed hair and a face that looks like it had been carved from something unyielding. He wasn't conventionally handsome. He looked hard. Harper stepped up to the table. "Champagne, gentlemen." None of the guards looked at her. They looked through her. Leon didn't move. He just gave a fractional nod. She stepped closer, balancing the heavy silver tray on her left hand, while her right reached for a full flute. She was careful. She was always careful. But the man seated to Leon's right suddenly shoved his chair back to stand up. The heavy mahogany chair caught Harper directly on the hip. The impact knocked the breath out of her. Her center of gravity shifted. The cheap rubber soles of her shoes found a patch of condensation on the marble floor. Physics took over. Harper pitched forward. She scrambled to correct the tray, but it was already tipping. A desperate, sharp gasp tore from her throat. The crystal flutes toppled. The silver tray slipped from her fingers. Time seemed to drag its feet. Harper watched in a kind of detached, cynical horror as 3 glasses of vintage red wine, ordered special for the table, launched themselves into the air. They hit Leon Cavallo squarely in the chest. The glass didn't shatter against him, but it bounced, dropping to the floor and exploding into sharp, glittering shards. The deep red liquid soaked instantly into the pristine white cotton of his dress shirt and the expensive dark wool of his jacket. It looked like a gunshot wound. It looked violent. The music didn't stop, but the conversation did. A ripple of absolute, suffocating silence expanded outward from table 4. Harper hit the floor hard, her knees taking the brunt of the fall on the marble. Pain flared, sharp and hot, but it was secondary to the ice-cold terror pooling in her stomach. The 5 men at the table moved. It wasn't a chaotic scramble. It was a synchronized, terrifying shift in posture. Hands disappeared inside jackets. Chairs were pushed aside. Harper stayed on her knees. She couldn't breathe. Her mind raced through the consequences. Fired? Sued? Dragged into an alley? The rumors about Cavallo's temper were legendary. He had dismantled a rival crew over a stolen shipment just last month. What did he do to clumsy waitresses? She started, her voice sounding like a rusted, "I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the cleaning. I'll too." Leon raised a single hand. The gesture was minimal, barely a flick of his wrist. But the 5 men froze mid-motion. They backed off, their hands slowly emerging from their coats. Empty. Leon looked down at his ruined suit. Then he looked at Harper. His eyes were a flat, unreadable gray. There was no fury in them. There was no annoyance. He looked at her as if she were a piece of complex machinery he was trying to figure out how to operate. He stood up. The movement was fluid. He stepped over the broken glass, his polished leather shoes crunching softly. He stopped right in front of her. Harper squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow, waiting for the harsh words. Instead, a large, warm hand gripped her upper arm. The hold was firm, but not bruising. He hoisted her to her feet with effortless strength. She stumbled slightly, her shoulder bumping against his chest. She smelled the spilled wine, mixing with the sharp, clean scent of bergamot and expensive tobacco. He leaned down, his mouth brushed just inches from her ear. "Smile," he whispered. His voice was low, gravelly, and entirely calm. "And pretend you're my wife tonight." Harper's brain stalled. The words didn't compute. Pretend you're my wife. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, panic bleeding into absolute confusion. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "What?" she breathed. Leon didn't repeat himself. He didn't offer a reassuring smile or gentle explanation. He simply shifted his grip from her arm to her hand, lacing his thick, calloused fingers through hers. The physical contact grounded her, sharp and electric. He turned to the surrounding crowd. The silence was still suffocating. Hundreds of eyes were glued to the spectacle. Leon's expression shifted. The cold, unyielding mask melted into something that looked dangerously like amused affection. "Darling," Leon said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the nearest tables. "I told you, you didn't have to dress up in the staff uniform just to sneak up on me." A collective nervous chuckle rippled through the onlookers. It was a weak, uncertain sound, but it broke the tension. The guests, eager to believe a narrative that didn't involve an execution on the dance floor, eagerly bought the lie. The murmurs began. "Oh, it's a joke. It's his woman. Just a game. Walk," Leon murmured, his voice dropping back to that dangerous, gravelly register. "Keep your chin up. Don't look at the floor." Harper's legs moved on autopilot. She walked beside him, painfully aware of her scuffed shoes, her cheap black uniform skirt, and the messy bun on top of her head. Beside her, Leon walked with the slow, confident stride of a man who owned the building. He led her away from the main floor, toward the private VIP alcoves bordering the ballroom. His guards fell into step behind them, a silent, imposing wall blocking any curious followers. As soon as the heavy velvet curtains closed behind them, cutting off the prying eyes of the gala, the illusion vanished. Leon dropped her hand. The warmth left her palm instantly, replaced by the chill of the air conditioning. "Take the apron off," he ordered. He wasn't looking at her. He was shrugging off his ruined, wine-soaked jacket, tossing it carelessly over a velvet armchair. "I don't understand," Harper said, her voice shaking. She crossed her arms over her chest. "Are you going to kill me in here?" Leon paused, unbuttoning the cuffs of his stained white shirt. He looked over his shoulder at her. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "If I wanted to kill you, I wouldn't have brought you to a soundproof room in the middle of a heavily surveilled hotel. I'd have let my men handle it in the alley. Take the apron off." Harper swallowed hard. Her hands trembled as she reached behind her back, untying the knot of her catering apron. She pulled it over her head. Underneath, she wore the standard-issue black slip dress. It was plain, sleeveless, and hit just below the knee. It wasn't haute couture, but without the apron, it passed for a simple cocktail dress. Leon turned fully toward her. He reached into his trousers pocket and pulled out a long velvet box. He flipped it open. Inside, a diamond tennis bracelet caught the dim light, throwing fractured rainbows across the walls. "Hold out your wrist," he said. "No." The word slipped out before she could stop it. Her survival instinct finally kicked in. "I'm not putting that on. I don't know you. I spilled wine on you. I'm sorry. I'll leave right now, and you'll never see me again." Leon stepped closer. The sheer size of him, in the small room, was overwhelming. "You aren't leaving. In 3 minutes, a man named Vicente is going to walk through that door. He is old, he is traditional,
and he is currently deciding whether to go to war with my family over a territory dispute. He reached out, catching her right wrist. He was surprisingly gentle as he draped the cold, heavy diamonds over her skin and fastened the clasp. Vicente believes in family men, Leon continued, his voice steady. He believes a man who is married is a man who has something to lose, and therefore, a man who can be trusted to keep a peace treaty. My fiancé was supposed to be here tonight to meet him. She didn't show. Harper stared at the diamonds on her wrist. They probably cost more than her life. And you think he's going to believe I'm your fiancé? I'm wearing orthopedic shoes. Leon's gaze dropped to her feet. Stand behind the coffee table. It's solid oak. It will hide your feet. This is insane. This is survival, Leon corrected. For both of us. You play the part of a devoted, quiet wife for the next 20 minutes, and I pay off whatever debt keeps you working catering gigs at 1 o'clock in the morning. Harper's head snapped up. How do you know I have debt? You're 26, working a manual labor job with a bruised collarbone from carrying heavy trays, and you didn't run when a table full of armed men stood up. You froze because you need this job. You need the money. He leaned in, his gray eyes pinning her in place. Play the part, Harper, and I'll make sure you never have to carry a tray again. He knew her name. Of course he knew her name. She was wearing a damn name tag. Before she could process the intrusion, the handle of the heavy wooden door turned. Smile, Leon muttered, slipping his arm around her waist and pulling her flush against his side. The heat of his body radiated through the thin silk of her dress. The door opened. An older man walked in. He leaned heavily on a silver-tipped cane, his face weathered into deep, permanent scowls. He smelled of cigars and old leather. 2 massive men flanked him. Leon, Vicente rasped. His eyes immediately darted to Harper. He looked her up and down, dissecting her worth in a fraction of a second. I see you brought company, though she looks a little shaken. Leon's grip tightened on Harper's waist, a silent command. Harper forced her lips to curve upward. She leaned into Leon's side, resting her hand flat against his chest, right over the wine stain. He's clumsy, Harper said smoothly. Surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice, she looked Vicente dead in the eye. He spilled his drink on himself, trying to impress me. I'm still deciding if it worked. Vicente stared at her in silence for 3 agonizing seconds. Then the old man threw his head back and laughed. Vicente's laughter was a wet, rattling sound that scraped against the walls of the small VIP room. It lacked any genuine warmth. It was the laugh of a man who enjoyed watching others squirm, a test of nerve dressed up as amusement. Harper didn't move. She kept her hand flat against Leon's chest, feeling the steady, rhythmic thump of his heart beneath the damp fabric. He wasn't afraid. The realization grounded her. If the man with the target on his back wasn't panicking, she couldn't afford to either. The old man finally stopped chuckling. He leaned heavily on his silver-tipped cane and lowered himself into the velvet armchair opposite the oak coffee table. His 2 massive guards took up positions behind him, crossing their arms in synchronized intimidation. Sit, Vicente commanded, gesturing with a liver-spotted hand. Leon guided Harper to the small love seat, facing the old man. She sat on the edge of the cushion, keeping her orthopedic shoes carefully tucked behind the thick carved leg of the coffee table, just as Leon had instructed. Leon sat beside her. He didn't crowd her, but his proximity was a physical weight in the room. He exuded a quiet, violent authority that seemed to push back against Vicente's heavy presence. I heard rumors, Leon. Vicente began reaching into his tailored jacket to retrieve a silver cigar case. Rumors that you were distracted, that the docks on the south side were bleeding cargo because you were spending too much time restructuring your management. He clipped the end of the cigar with deliberate slowness. I see now, the distraction is of a different nature. He pointed the unlit cigar at Harper. What is your name, girl? Harper, she said. Her voice held steady. She dug her fingernails into her own palms to keep her hands from shaking. Just Harper. Vicente struck a match. The pungent, earthy smell of burning tobacco quickly filled the small space, masking the scent of the spilled wine. It will be Cavallo soon enough, Leon interjected. His tone was casual, but the underlying warning was clear. Don't push her. Vicente puffed, a thick cloud of blue smoke rising toward the ceiling vents. A quiet one. Not the usual type for your family. Your father liked them loud. He liked them draped in gold and screaming at him in public. It made him feel alive, he said. My father is dead, Leon said flatly. And I don't run my life or my business the way he did. Clearly. Vicente's dark eyes locked onto Harper again. He was dissecting her. Looking for the seams in the illusion. You don't look like you belong in this world, Harper. You look like a civilian.
You look like someone who flinches when a door slams too hard. I don't flinch, Harper replied. The words were out before she could weigh the consequence of speaking back. But the adrenaline was crystallizing into something cold and sharp inside her. She had spent the last 3 years dealing with aggressive debt collectors banging on her apartment door at all hours. She knew how to look dangerous men in the eye and give them nothing. And I don't care about your world, Mr. Vincente. I care about Leon. It was a staggering lie, but she delivered it with the deadpan exhaustion of a woman who was genuinely tired of dealing with difficult men. Vincente paused. The glowing tip of his cigar flared. He looked at Leon, then back to Harper. A slow, approving nod followed. Civilians, Vincente muttered, tapping his ashes into a crystal tray on the table. They always have the sharpest teeth when backed into a corner. Maybe you aren't completely blind, Leon. A woman with nothing to lose is a liability. A woman who knows how to hold her ground is an asset. Leon shifted slightly, leaning forward to rest his forearms on his knees. The movement brought him closer to the old man. The casual pretense dropped. The air in the room grew instantly heavier. We aren't here to discuss my domestic life, Vincente, Leon said, his voice dropping an octave. We're here about the transit lines along the East River. You want 30% of the incoming freights. I offered 15. You took a shot at one of my warehouse managers to prove a point. He was warned, Vincente countered, his own voice hardening. And now I am warning you, Leon said softly. I am marrying this woman. I am solidifying my hold on this city. I am not my father, and I do not have his patience for petty border wars. You will take 20%. You will pull your men back behind the industrial district line, and we will drink to a long, profitable peace. Harper sat perfectly still. She was watching a negotiation that involved human lives and millions of dollars bartered over a coffee table while she wore a waitress slip and fake confidence. Vincente smoked in silence. The clock on the wall ticked with agonizing volume. The old man's eyes flicked to Harper's wrist, catching the glare of the diamond tennis bracelet. He seemed to weigh the diamonds, the steady gaze of the woman wearing them, and the cold, unblinking stare of the man sitting beside her. 20%, Vincente finally rasped. He stubbed out the cigar. And safe passage for my trucks through the north corridor. Agreed, Leon said. Vincente stood up. The 2 guards immediately stepped forward to flank him. Send the paperwork to my lawyer, Leon. And congratulations on the engagement. Keep her close. The quiet ones are always the first to realize they can do better. Without another word, the old man turned and limped out of the room, his men trailing like massive, silent shadows. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. The lock engaged automatically. They were alone again. The silence was absolute. Harper exhaled a breath she felt she had been holding for 20 minutes. Her shoulders slumped. The adrenaline vanished, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made her hands shake violently. She leaned forward, resting her head in her hands, staring at the scuffed toes of her orthopedic shoes. You did well. Leon's voice broke the quiet. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound relieved. He sounded purely observational. Harper didn't look up. She kept her face buried in her hands, trying to regulate her breathing. The smell of Vicente's heavy cigar smoke clung to the upholstery, mixing with the sharp tang of the cabin air, soaking into Leon's shirt. I want to go home, she whispered to the floor. I want to take off this bracelet, put my apron back on, get my final paycheck from Gary, and go back to my apartment. She heard the rustle of fabric. Leon stood up. He walked over to a small, built-in wet bar, tucked into the corner of the room. Glass clinked against glass. You can't go back to the floor, Leon said, his back to her, as he poured 2 fingers of scotch into a fresh tumbler. Gary has already crossed your name off the shift roster. As far as the Beaumont Hotel is concerned, you were an erratic employee who caused a scene and was escorted off the premises by my security. Harper's head snapped up. Panic flared anew, hot and suffocating. You got me fired! I told you I need this job! I have debt. I know, Leon interrupted, gently turning around. He didn't offer her the drink. He just held it, swirling the amber liquid. 32,000, mostly medical bills left over from a mother who passed away 2 years ago, compounded by predatory late fees. Your rent is 3 weeks past due. You take the bus from the South District. You buy your groceries at the discount market on 4th Street. Harper stared at him. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin cold and clammy. The fear returned, but it wasn't the sudden, violent terror of dropping a tray. It was a creeping, insidious dread. How do you know all that? I own the debt collection agency that holds your paper, Leon said simply. He took a slow, steady sip of the scotch. I didn't know who you were when you spilled the wine, but while we were walking from the ballroom to this room, my head of security scanned your face. By the time Vicente walked through that door, I had your entire life on a tablet. He walked back toward the seating area, stopping a few feet from the coffee table. He looked down at her. I told you I would pay off whatever debt was keeping you here. Leon continued. I keep my word. The balance is cleared. As of 3 minutes ago, you owe nothing to my agency or to anyone else in this city. Harper's mouth opened, but no sound came out. $32,000. It was a number that had crushed her chest every morning for 2 years. It was the reason she worked catering until 2 a.m. and woke up at 6 a.m. to scrub floors at a dental clinic. It was gone? Just like that? Because she sat on a couch and lied to an old man? She looked at her wrist. The diamonds mocked her. She reached for the clasp with trembling fingers, struggling to unhook the intricate locking mechanism. Here, she said, her voice cracking. Take this back. We're square. I played your fiancé. You paid the debt. We're done. Leon watched her fumble with the clasp. He didn't move to help her. Keep it. No, Harper insisted, fighting tears of pure overwhelm. I don't want it. If I try to pawn this, they'll think I stole it. It's a liability. Take it off. Leon set his glass on the oak table. He stepped forward and knelt on the floor in front of her. The movement was startling. A man like Leon Cavallo didn't kneel. He reached out and gently caught her frantic, shaking hands. His grip was warm and entirely steady. He easily undid the clasp, pulling the heavy chain of diamonds away from her skin. He didn't put it in his pocket. He placed it carefully on the coffee table. You can't walk out the front doors, Leon said, his voice quiet, stripped of the commanding edge he used with Vicente. There are reporters in the lobby covering the gala. My men are stationed at the exits. The moment you step out, you'll be photographed as the woman on my arm. Vicente has eyes on the street. If you leave in a catering apron and get on a public bus, he'll know I lied. He'll know you're a civilian. So, what am I supposed to do? Harper asked, the exhaustion finally pulling tears into her eyes. Live in this VIP room? No. Leon stood back up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He typed a quick message. Thomas is pulling an armored SUV into the underground loading dock. He is my most trusted driver. He will take you home through the private garage. No cameras. No reporters. Harper looked at him, searching his stoic, hard face for a trap. Why are you actually doing this? You could have just let your guards throw me in an alley. You could have forced me to play along without clearing my debt. You're a mob boss. Leon picked up his ruined suit jacket. He didn't look at her as he draped it over his arm. I am a businessman, Harper. You provided a service. You saved me a violent, expensive war. Clearing a $32,000 ledger is a bargain. He walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the brass handle. He looked back at her over his shoulder. Thomas is waiting by the service elevator, Leon said. Don't come back to the Beaumont. He opened the door and walked out, leaving her alone in the quiet room. Harper sat frozen for over a long time, listening to the hum of the air conditioning. She looked down at the coffee table. The diamond bracelet was still there, glittering under the recessed lighting. She didn't touch it. She stood up, smoothed down the front of her cheap black dress, and walked out the door toward the service elevator. She owed him nothing. But as she descended into the concrete belly of the hotel, she couldn't shake the chilling realization that men like Leon Cavallo never really closed a ledger. The armored SUV smelled of leather and ozone. It was a sterile, expensive scent that made Harper intensely aware of the sweat drying on her skin and the lingering ghost of spilled wine. The rain had started while she was in the service elevator. It lashed against the tinted, bulletproof windows in heavy, rhythmic sheets, blurring the neon lights of the city into long streaks of color. Thomas drove with the precision of a machine. He was a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a face completely devoid of expression. He hadn't spoken a single word since she slid into the back seat in the underground loading dock. He just met her eyes in the rearview mirror, nodded once, and put the massive vehicle in gear. Harper stared out the window. The glittering high-rises of the financial district gave way to the blocky utilitarian architecture of the midtown commercial zones. Gradually, the streetlights grew dimmer, the roads grew rougher. By the time they crossed into the South District, the heavy tires of the SUV were dodging deep potholes that pooled with oily rainwater. Thomas pulled over at the curb in front of a crumbling 6-story brick building. The neon sign above the corner bodega flickered, buzzing like an angry hornet. "Thank you," Harper said. Her voice sounded thin and entirely out of place in the silent, heavily armored cabin. Thomas simply reached up and pressed a button on the console. The heavy locks on the rear doors disengaged with a solid mechanical clunk. Harper stepped out into the rain. She didn't look back as the SUV pulled away, its red taillights quickly swallowed by the downpour and the dark. She hurried up the concrete steps of her building, her cheap orthopedic shoes squeaking against the wet linoleum of the lobby. The elevator was broken. It was always broken. She climbed 4 flights of stairs, the dull ache in her lower back flaring into a sharp, insistent pain. Her apartment was tiny. It smelled faintly of old cabbage and the bleach she used to scrub the linoleum. She locked the deadbolt, fastened the chain, and leaned against the flimsy wood. She was alone. She was alive. Harper pushed off the door and walked straight to the small, rickety desk pushed against the far wall. She opened her ancient laptop. The fan whirred to life, groaning under the effort. Her fingers flew across the worn keys, pulling up the web portal for Apex Recovery Services. It was a URL she had memorized, a digital tether that had dictated her life for 24 months. She typed in her account number. She typed in her password. The loading icon spun. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her chest tightened. The screen refreshed. Current balance. Note all zeros. 00 status. Paid in full. Harper stared at the green text. She blinked hard, expecting the numbers to change back to the crushing red font that usually greeted her. They didn't. $32,000. It was gone. She closed the laptop. She walked to her narrow bed, sat on the edge of the mattress, and finally, completely broke down. The tears weren't graceful. They were violent, ugly sobs that tore from her chest, born of sheer exhaustion and the sudden, terrifying absence of weight. She cried until her head pounded and her eyes swelled. When the tears finally stopped, she stripped off the damp black dress, threw it in the trash can, and crawled under her thin quilt. For the next 3 days, Harper waited for the other shoe to drop. She returned to her morning job at the dental clinic. Dr. Evans, a perpetually stressed man with a receding hairline, didn't ask why she looked so exhausted. He just pointed her toward the sterilization room. She scrubbed stainless steel tools. She mopped the waiting room floor. She rode the bus home. Every time a black car drove past, her pulse spiked. Every time there was a knock at a neighbor's door, she froze. She expected heavily armed men in suits to kick down her door. She expected a phone call demanding a favor. But nothing happened. The city moved on. The news cycles churned out updates on the mayor's zoning laws and the upcoming baseball season. There was no mention of a shootout at the Beaumont Hotel. There was no mention of Leon Cavallo. By Friday afternoon, the crushing paranoia began to recede, replaced by a hollow, strange reality. She was actually free. Harper walked out of the clinic at 3 o'clock, unbuttoning her shapeless blue scrubs as she headed toward the bus stop. The afternoon sun was blinding, cutting through the smog of the South District. She checked her phone. Her bank account had just enough for a decent cup of coffee and groceries that didn't come from a can. She turned the corner. The black armored SUV was parked illegally in the bus lane. The engine rumbled, a low, powerful vibration that she could feel through the soles of her sneakers. The tinted rear window rolled down halfway. Thomas wasn't driving. Leon Cavallo sat in the back seat. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo today. He wore a dark, tailored charcoal suit. His tie loosened at the collar. He looked tired. He looked out the window, his flat, gray eyes finding her immediately on the crowded sidewalk. "Get in," Leon said. The command cut easily through the noise of the traffic. Harper stopped dead. The pedestrians flowed around her, oblivious to the gravity, pulling her toward the curb. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She walked to the car, stopping just short of the open door. "You said we were square. You said I owed you nothing. You don't owe me anything," Leon replied. His voice was calm, utterly devoid of threat. "But Vincente is a paranoid man, and you have a problem." "I don't have a problem," Harper said, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the strap of her canvas tote bag. "My problem vanished when you paid off my debt. I go to work. I go home. I don't exist in your world." Leon looked at her for a long moment. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean out the window. "Get in the car, Harper. We are drawing a crowd, and the people looking for you don't need a neon sign pointing to your location." Harper glanced over her shoulder. The regulars at the corner bodega were beginning to stare. A massive black tank of a vehicle, idling in the South District, was a magnet for the worst kind of attention. Swallowing the hard knot of panic in her throat, she reached out, pulled the heavy door open, and slid onto the leather seat. The door shut with a heavy sealing thud that completely muted the street noise. The air conditioning was freezing. Leon pressed a button, and the privacy partition behind the driver's seat slid down. Thomas was at the wheel. He didn't look back. The SUV pulled smoothly away from the curb. "What do you mean people are looking for me?" Harper demanded, turning in her seat to face him. Leon picked up a sleek black tablet resting on the center console. He tapped the screen twice and handed it to her. Harper took it hesitantly. The screen displayed 3 high-resolution photographs. They were surveillance stills. The first showed a man in a leather jacket talking to the owner of her local grocery store. The second showed 2 men standing across the street from her apartment building. The third was a shot of a man sitting in a parked sedan right outside Dr. Evans's dental clinic. Vincente agreed to the terms of the lines, Leon explained. His tone strictly business. He agreed to pull his men back, but he doesn't like losing leverage. He doesn't like being forced into a corner by a man half his age. He wants to know if the woman I paraded in front of him is real or if I manufactured a fiancé to secure a peace treaty. Harper stared at the photos. The blood rushed in her ears. "They're watching me. They are trying to figure out who you are," Leon corrected. "Right now, you are a ghost. You don't have a social media presence. Your credit history was wiped clean 3 days ago. To a man like Vincente, a ghost is suspicious. If he connects you to the catering staff at the Beaumont, he will know I lied. And if he knows you lied," Leon took the tablet back from her hands. He set it face down on the console. "Then the treaty is void. He attacks my shipping lines, I retaliate, and the city bleeds. But before that happens, he will make an example of you. You embarrassed him by existing. Men like Vincente do not forgive embarrassment." Harper felt the air leave her lungs. The panic wasn't sharp this time. It was a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on her chest. She had survived crushing debt. She had survived working herself to the bone. She didn't know how to survive this. "So what?" she asked, her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "You came to warn me? To tell me to run?" "Running makes you look guilty. It proves you are a loose end," Leon said. He turned his head, his gaze locking onto hers. The flat gray of his eyes held an intense, unyielding focus. "You don't run. You lean in." "Lean in?" "Tomorrow night, there is a charity gala at the Museum of Modern Art. It is highly public. The press will be there. Vincent's lieutenants will be there." Leon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He held it out to her. "You are going to attend with me. You are going to smile for the cameras. You are going to wear my ring. And you are going to prove to the entire city that you belong at my side." Harper stared at the envelope. She didn't take it. "You want me to keep playing pretend? For how long?" 6 months, Leon stated. "Enough time for the transit deals to finalize, and for Vincente to shift his focus to a different territory dispute. After 6 months, we will have a quiet, public falling out, an amicable separation. You keep the ring, you keep the severance package I have outlined in that envelope, and you disappear to whatever city you choose, completely protected." "A severance package?" She let out a dry, cynical laugh. "I'm a fake fiancé on a payroll. You are an independent contractor," Leon said, without a hint of irony. "The envelope contains a legally binding contract drawn up by my attorneys. It guarantees you a monthly stipend, round-the-clock security, and a lump sum of $2 million upon the termination of the agreement in 6 months. Harper stopped breathing. $2 million? "If you refuse," Leon continued, his voice dropping slightly, softening the harsh reality of his words, "I will have Thomas drive you to the airport right now. I will put you on a private jet to Europe, and you will have to look over your shoulder for the rest of your life." Vincent has a long memory. He held the envelope closer to her. "I am not asking you to fight my wars, Harper. I am asking you to wear a dress, hold my hand, and let my reputation keep you alive." She looked at the cream-colored paper. She looked at the man offering it. He was a criminal. He was dangerous. But he hadn't lied to her yet. Harper reached out and took the envelope. It felt heavy in her hands. "I get to pick the city when this is over," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Leon's lips twitched. It was the absolute ghost of a smile. "Any city in the world." The contract was 34 pages of dense, unfeeling legalese. Harper sat at her rickety kitchen table, the single overhead bulb casting harsh yellow light over the stark white paper. The document didn't speak of romance or engagements. It spoke of public optics, asset protection, and non-disclosure parameters. Clause Spell 2 dictated that she must reside in a secure penthouse provided by Cavallo Enterprises. Clause 7.1 outlined the strict schedule of public appearances. Clause 12 detailed the $2 million payout, contingent on her complete silence regarding the arrangement for the rest of her natural life. She read every word. She didn't have a lawyer, but a lifetime of dodging predatory collection agencies had taught her how to read the fine print. There were no hidden traps. It was a sterile, transactional purchase of her freedom and her identity for the next 6 months. Harper picked up the heavy black pen Leon had left with the envelope. She pressed the nib to the signature line. The ink bled slightly into the thick paper. With a sharp, definitive motion, she signed her name. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, a sharp knock rattled her door. Harper opened it to find a severe-looking woman with a sleek blonde bob holding a garment bag. Thomas stood silently behind her in the hallway. "I am Camille," the woman said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She looked around the tiny, cramped apartment with a practiced blankness. "We have 4 hours. Sit." What followed was not a fairy tale makeover. It was an armoring. Camille didn't ask Harper about her preferences. She worked with brutal efficiency. She scrubbed Harper's face, applied layers of cosmetics that felt surprisingly weightless, and pinned her hair back into a sharp, unforgiving chignon that pulled at her scalp. Then came the dress. Camille unzipped the garment bag, revealing a sheath of deep emerald silk. It had a high neckline and long sleeves, completely modest, until Harper turned around and felt the draft against her skin. The back plunged in a deep V, exposing the long curve of her spine. It didn't make her feel beautiful. It made her feel expensive. It made her feel untouchable. "Shoes," Camille barked, dropping a pair of black stiletto heels on the floor. Harper slid her feet into them. The leather was stiff, the arch punishing. She stood up, her center of gravity shifting entirely. The orthopedic shoes were gone. She was someone else now. Thomas escorted her down to the idling SUV. This time, Leon was waiting outside the vehicle. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo that fit him with lethal precision. He looked her up and down, his gray eyes registering the transformation. He didn't offer a compliment. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He flipped it open. A massive emerald-cut diamond caught the gloomy midday light. It was enormous. It was heavy. "Give me your left hand," Leon said. Harper held out her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. Leon slid the ring onto her finger. The platinum band felt heavy, anchoring her to the reality of the contract she had just signed. "Do not take it off," Leon instructed, his voice low. "Not to sleep, not to shower. You are being watched from the moment we leave this curb." "I understand," Harper said, staring at the stone. They got into the car. The drive to the Museum of Modern Art was silent for the first 10 minutes. Harper focused on breathing, the tight bodice of the emerald dress restricting her ribs. "Our story," Leon finally said, breaking the quiet as they crossed into the Upper East Side. "We met 3 months ago at a private gallery showing in Soho. You were looking at a Rothko painting. You didn't know who I was, and you didn't care. That is what caught my attention." "A Rothko?" Harper repeated. "Got it. Am I supposed to know anything about art?" "No," Leon said, looking out the tinted window. "You are supposed to find the pretension of the art world exhausting. You don't suffer fools, Harper. You are cynical. You are grounded. Play yourself. Just with a $2 million safety net." The SUV slowed as it approached the museum. The street was barricaded. A massive crowd of onlookers and paparazzi strained against the velvet ropes. The flashbulbs were already firing, turning the rainy evening into a strobe-lit chaotic blur. "Are you ready?" Leon asked, turning to face her. "No," Harper admitted truthfully. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." Leon reached out, lacing his fingers through hers. The warmth of his grip was the only real thing in the car. "When the door opens, the noise will hit you. Don't flinch. Don't look at the cameras. Look at the stairs, and occasionally look at me." Thomas opened the door. The roar of the crowd washed over them, a physical wave of sound. Camera shutters clicked in a deafening mechanical chorus. Reporters shouted Leon's name. Harper stepped out onto the wet pavement. The stilettos dug into the concrete. Leon stepped out behind her, instantly moving to her side. He wrapped a heavy possessive arm around her waist, his hand resting flush against the exposed skin of her lower back. The heat of his touch sent a jolt straight up her spine. "Walk," he murmured, his breath brushing her temple. Harper fixed her eyes on the heavy glass doors of the museum. She kept her chin parallel to the ground. She didn't smile. She channeled every ounce of exhaustion, every unpaid bill, every hour spent scrubbing floors into a mask of absolute unbothered ice. The interior of the Museum of Modern Art was a cavernous expanse of white walls and polished concrete. A string quartet played in the main atrium, the sharp notes bouncing off the high ceilings. Wait staff, in pristine white coats, circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Harper knew exactly how much their feet hurt. She instinctively mapped the room, identifying the blind spots near the service doors and the subtle, exhausted micro-expressions of the servers. "Relax your shoulders," Leon muttered, taking 2 flutes of champagne from a passing tray and handing one to her. "You look like you're preparing to throw a punch." "I might," Harper whispered back, taking a sip. The champagne was dry and crisp, instantly warming her stomach. "There are a lot of people staring at us." "Let them stare," Leon said, guiding her toward the center of the room. They moved through the crowd. It was a bizarre collision of worlds. Wealthy philanthropists, politicians, and socialites mingled openly with men who wore tailored suits, but had the undeniable heavy posture of career criminals. Leon introduced her to a blur of names and faces. Harper nodded, offered her cold hand, and let Leon do the talking. She leaned into the role. When an aggressively cheerful councilwoman asked about the ring, Harper simply raised her left hand, let the diamond catch the light, and gave a small, bored smile. "It's heavy," Harper said smoothly. "Leon insists." The councilwoman laughed nervously and excused herself. Leon's grip on Harper's waist tightened slightly in approval. "You're a natural," he murmured. "I've spent years serving these people," Harper replied, keeping her voice pitched low. "I know exactly how little they actually listen." An hour into the gala, Leon was pulled aside by a man with a silver lapel pin. A whispered conversation turned into a necessity. "I have to take this," Leon said, his eyes scanning the immediate perimeter. "Stay right here. Do not leave the main atrium. Thomas is by the south exit," Harper said, taking another sip of her champagne. Leon gave her a long look, a silent warning, before stepping away into a small alcove with the man. Harper stood alone, near a massive steel sculpture. She enjoyed the momentary quiet, but the peace lasted exactly 40 seconds. "Harper, is it?" She turned. 2 men approached. The one speaking was tall, painfully thin, with a sharp, rat-like face and slicked-back dark hair. He wore a maroon suit that screamed for attention. The man behind him was built like a cinder block and remained perfectly silent. "Yes," Harper said. She didn't offer her hand. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink. "I'm Rossi," the thin man said, a greasy smile stretching across his face. "I work with Vincente. He sends his warmest regards to the happy couple." Harper recognized the name from Leon's briefing in the car. Rossi was Vincente's primary lieutenant, a man known for handling the violent disputes on the docks. He was a predator, testing the fences. "Thank you, Rossi," Harper said flatly. Rossi stepped a fraction too close. He smelled like cheap gin and expensive aftershave. "It's a funny thing. I know everyone in Leon's circle. I know the women he usually entertains. They run in a very specific, very loud crowd. And yet, no one seems to know where you came from. You just appeared. I didn't realize I was required to check in with Vincente's men regarding my social calendar," Harper said. Rossi's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, appraising sneer. "Leon is playing a dangerous game. He thinks he can outsmart the old guard. He thinks a shiny ring and a pretty dress can cover up a weakness. Vincente thinks you're a prop. Prop, sweetheart. A civilian hired to smile." Panic flared in Harper's chest, sharp and hot, but she viciously stamped it down. This was the test. If she cracked, if she showed fear, Rossi would report back, and the treaty would burn. She thought of her empty bank account. She thought of the heavy, cold diamond on her finger. Harper stepped into Rossi's space, closing the gap until she was inches from his face. She forced herself not to look at the massive guard behind him. "A civilian," Harper repeated, her voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. She tilted her head, inspecting Rossi with open disgust. "You think you know Leon. You think you know what he needs. You don't know a damn thing." She reached out, moving so fast, the guard behind Rossi twitched. But Harper didn't strike. She simply flicked a piece of imaginary lint off the lapel of Rossi's maroon jacket. "Leon didn't pick me because I'm loud, Rossi," she said, holding his dark, rat-like gaze. "He picked me because when men like you try to intimidate me, I don't feel the need to run to him for protection. I handle it myself. Now, take a step back before I decide to tell my fiancé that you ruined my evening." Rossi stared at her. The silence stretched, brittle and dangerous. Harper's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her hand remained perfectly steady. Slowly, Rossi took a step back. The greasy smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Enjoy the party, Harper. We'll be seeing you around." He turned and melted into the crowd, the massive guard trailing behind him. Harper exhaled, a shaky, imperceptible breath. She leaned against the pedestal of the steel sculpture, her knees suddenly weak. That was incredibly reckless. Leon stepped out of the shadows of the alcove. He walked over, his face unreadable. He took the half-empty champagne flute from her trembling hand and set it on a passing service tray. "Did you hear that?" Harper asked, her voice tight. "Every word," Leon said. He looked down at her, the flat gray of his eyes shifting into something entirely new. It wasn't transactional anymore. It was raw respect. "I told you to lean in. I didn't tell you to threaten Vicente's attack dog." "He was pushing," Harper said defensively. "I pushed back." "Did I ruin it?" Leon slowly reached out, his knuckles brushing against her cheek. The touch was startlingly gentle. "No, Harper. You just convinced him. Come on, let's go home." The ride back to the penthouse was entirely silent. The adrenaline that had carried Harper through the museum lobby, past the blinding flashbulbs, and straight into the face of a cartel lieutenant, suddenly evaporated. It left behind a hollow, aching exhaustion that settled deep into her bones. She stared at the privacy partition separating them from Thomas. Slowly, deliberately, she reached down and unbuckled the straps of the black stilettos. She kicked them off. They hit the floorboards with a dull thud. She pulled her knees together and rested her bare feet on the plush floor mat, wiggling her cramped toes. Leon didn't say a word. He just watched her from the corner of his eye, his own posture finally losing the rigid, coiled tension he maintained in public. He reached up and untied his bow tie, pulling it loose around his collar. The SUV descended into a private subterranean parking garage. Thomas parked next to a dedicated elevator bank. Leon got out first, offering his hand. Harper ignored it. She picked up her shoes in one hand, grabbed the hem of the heavy emerald silk with the other, and stepped out onto the concrete barefoot. The private elevator opened directly into the penthouse. There were no hallways. There were no keys. The steel doors parted to reveal a massive open space that smelled of cedarwood and cold rain. Floor-to-ceiling windows made up the entire far wall, offering a sweeping, unobstructed view of the city skyline. It was beautiful. It was desolate. It looked exactly like a cage in the sky. Harper dropped her shoes by the door. She walked toward the glass, her bare feet silent against the dark hardwood floor. She looked down at the grid of traffic, the distant, blurry streetlights of the lower districts, where her cramped apartment sat empty. "Rossi will tell Vincente," Harper said to the glass. Her voice sounded thin in the massive room. "He'll tell him I threatened him. Will that break the treaty?" "No." Leon walked to a minimalist kitchen island, carved from a single block of black marble. He didn't pour scotch this time. He filled a glass with ice and water. "Rossi is a predator," Leon continued, walking over and handing her the glass. "Predators don't respect submission. They respect teeth. If you had cowered, if you had looked to me to save you, he would have known you were a civilian. He would have told Vincente, I hired a waitress. But you didn't." Harper took the glass. The ice clinked against the sides. Her hands were finally starting to shake. The delayed shock was setting in. "I don't have teeth, Leon. I have a script. And a $2 million severance package." "You have survival instincts," Leon corrected, standing beside her. He looked out at the city, his hands shoved deep into his trouser pockets. "You grew up in a world just as ruthless as mine, Harper. The only difference is your monsters wear debt collector badges, and mine wear tailored suits. The mechanics of survival are exactly the same." Harper took a long drink of the freezing water. It grounded her. She leaned her forehead against cool glass of the window. The platinum and diamond ring on her left hand felt like an anchor dragging her down into the deep end. "I need to take this dress off," she whispered. The silk was suffocating her. A physical reminder of the lie she was living. She reached behind her back, her fingers fumbling for the hidden zipper at the base of the deep V-neck. The clasp was tiny, buried in the expensive fabric. Her hands were trembling too hard. She tried to pinch the metal, but her fingers kept slipping. A frustrated, cynical laugh bubbled up in her throat. She had survived a mob confrontation, but she was going to be defeated by a piece of couture hardware. "Stop," Leon murmured. He stepped up right behind her. Harper froze. The heat, radiating from his chest, was a stark contrast to the cold glass in front of her. She could smell the rain on his jacket mixed with the faint scent of expensive tobacco. "Drop your hands," he instructed quietly. Harper let her arms fall to her sides. She stared straight ahead at the city lights. Leon's hands brushed against the bare skin of her lower back. His fingers were rough, calloused, from years of a life she didn't want to understand. Yet, his touch was incredibly precise. He found the tiny metal clasp instantly. He didn't rush. He pulled the zipper down with a slow, smooth motion, the soft sound of parting fabric filling the quiet space between them. The sudden rush of cool air against her spine made her shiver. Leon didn't step back immediately. He stayed there, his proximity a heavy, undeniable weight. He wasn't a boss assessing an employee. He wasn't a client examining a purchase. 6 months, Harper breathed, the words barely audible. 6 months, Leon agreed, his voice a low gravel right behind her ear. He finally stepped back, putting distance between them. Your bedroom is down the hall on the left. The security detail changes at midnight, but they remain outside the elevator. No one comes in here but me. You are safe, Harper. Get some sleep. Harper turned around. Leon was already walking away, his broad shoulders retreating down the dark corridor toward his own wing of the penthouse. She stood alone in the dark, the unzipped dress slipping slightly off her shoulders. She looked down at the massive diamond glittering on her finger. Leon had told her she was safe, but as she listened to the heavy, quiet click of his bedroom door closing, Harper realized the truth. Vicente wasn't the danger anymore. The real danger was how easily she was adapting to the dark, and how much she didn't want to take the ring off. Will Harper survive the next 6 months in Leon Cavallo's dangerous world? Or will the lines between their fake engagement and real feelings blur into something deadly? The contract is signed, but in the Mafia, rules are made to be broken, and the danger is only just beginning. If you loved this tense, grounded romance drama, make sure to smash that like button and share it with a friend. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future parts of this 9-part series. What do you think Harper should do next? Drop a comment down below.